Hi friends, welcome to See the Light Art Projects. I'm so glad I have you with me today. I'm Pat Nepley, I'm your master artist, and this is a series of 4 lessons that should be viewed in sequence to result in a great art project together. So I hope you've watched the preparation segment for this project so you have everything you need to get ready for our poppy collage. And so let me tell you what you're going to need for this very first lesson, lesson 1. You'll need a good pencil, an eraser, a piece of white poster board cut into a square, I would say rather large, at least 14 by 14 inches. And you'll need either a fake or real flower that has a simple petal construction of only 4 to 6 petals. And that's all you'll need for this first lesson. Now, you're going to need some more supplies for the other lessons, and I hope that someone at home with you has watched the preparation DVD so that you could get all the supplies and materials you need ready to complete this poppy collage. Now, what we're going to be talking about today is a really great artist. I just love her. Her name is Georgia O'Keeffe. Now, let's talk about where the art scene was at the turn of the 1800s to the 1900s. It was an amazing time in the history of art. There were so many different art movements. We had Cubism at around 1902, started in Paris by Pablo Picasso and his friend George Braque. We also had the Impressionists that were at their vanguard in the late 1800s, and they had shown in the independent salons of France, people like Claude Monet and Auguste Renoir. And then you had the post-impressionists that were coming onto the scene like Rousseau and Matisse. So the whole world was exploring some new movements in art, including photography. Photography had only been developed in the 1850s, right around the time of the Civil War, but it was only used to document things that were happening or portraiture. But photography as an art form was only starting to come into vogue at around the same time, the early 1900s. And so abstract expressionism was coming into vogue. Abstraction. Abstract. Have you heard those words before? Especially when it's related to art? Well, abstract means that it's not something that's an identifiable subject matter. So if you were to draw a cat, people would look at it and say, that's a cat. But the abstract artist felt that you should just express how you felt through line, color, shape. And so I want to show you some abstract art so you can really get an idea of what I'm talking about. It's important to know as we continue on with this lesson on poppy collage. So here's a piece of art. This is a painting that I painted called Leaves. And I based it on the inspiration of a willow tree. But if I didn't tell you that, you might not know by looking at all the splatters and splashes that this is called Leaves. Now here's another famous piece of art by the Russian artist Wassily Kandinsky. And this is called Last Judgment, painted in 1912. And you'll see how Kandinsky used a lot of color and line to express how he felt. The idea was that you didn't have to have an identifiable subject matter in order for it to be art, and in order for it to be valid as an expression of the artist. Well, that was so new and radical. And a lot of other artists started to embrace the idea that you didn't have to have great skill in drawing an identifiable object. Now, perhaps you've seen some abstract art and you think, well, I could do that. Well, you probably could. A lot of people like to paint to music, and they use that to help them express how they feel. So the idea of abstract is to move something away from looking real. And that's an important concept to know as we're talking about Georgia O'Keeffe and how she approached art. Okay, so abstraction is to move away from the real thing. So the real thing for someone like Georgia O'Keeffe was what she saw around her. And let me explain a little bit more about this artist. Georgia O'Keeffe was born in Sun Prairie, Wisconsin in 1887. She was a farm girl. She grew up on a dairy farm. And she took some local art lessons from a woman in the neighborhood, and a lot of her creativity came from sewing. She sewed all the family's clothes, she and her siblings. But she knew by the time she graduated high school that she really wanted to be an artist. She loved exploring everything that was around her in her state of Wisconsin. And she was one of those fortunate young people that got to travel to different places as she pursued her art. In fact, she went to the Art Institute of Chicago and the Art Students League in New York City, two really big art schools. But this was incredible for a young woman to do that at that time. So by 1917, she visited New York City, and that's where she met Alfred Stieglitz. Now, this is important for two reasons. Alfred Stieglitz was a famous photographer. And again, remember, photography was fairly new. But he owned a gallery called Gallery 291 in New York City. And he was bringing in artwork from the big artists over in Europe, such as Matisse, Rousseau, Gauguin. And he was showing America these amazing artworks. Well, that's when Georgia went to visit this gallery and said, wow, I don't have to paint like the old-time painters, just copying the masters, being as realistic as possible. I can actually make art my own way, what I feel. So that was a real eye-opener for her. And then she also met this powerful man, Alfred Stieglitz, who not only was an artist himself, but loved to champion other artists. Now, she didn't stay in New York City for very long. She actually left after she finished college and took several jobs as a commercial artist. Now, a commercial artist is somebody who makes money making art for products such as a calendar or a book or postcards or greeting cards, something like that. So this isn't the type of art you would see hanging in a museum, but art that is used to sell or market a product. So she did that for a few years, but she was really hungry to learn more about art. And so she continued to go to school, South Carolina, and then again in Texas. This is somebody who was a learner. Are you a learner? Do you like to learn new things, try something out? This is what Georgia O'Keeffe was like. Now, when Georgia was discovering how she wanted to approach art, she loved this idea of abstraction. And so what Georgia did was she would take a flower and she would look at it, but instead of just looking at it like we would, it was like she was looking at it through a magnifying glass. She wanted to see it really close up. Have you ever done that? Maybe you have a magnifying glass at home and you've looked at an insect on the ground. When you get to see details you just don't see with your naked eye. And this fascinated Georgia. And she thought, well, how do I show something as if it's through a magnifying glass? I can't do that, but I could paint things really big, and it's like you're looking through a magnifying glass. And that's what Georgia did. She painted on large canvases and blew everything up. And it was her way of abstracting. She was removing it from being real, because flowers are fairly small. And she was showing them larger than life, larger than life. And that was a way to abstract, getting further and further from reality and from what's real. Now, Georgia didn't do this all the time. She was trained as a classical painter, and so she could paint very realistically. Look at this painting called Apple Family. And you can see very clearly that this is a grouping of apples. This was painted in 1912. So she had the skill to paint realistically, but she wanted to really explore the whole concept of abstraction. Now, she started to do some drawings and she sent them to a friend as she's exploring this idea of magnifying things and exploring with abstraction with color and line. And the friend loved her drawings and gave them to Alfred Stieglitz. Remember him? He's the one who owned the gallery in New York City. Well, Alfred Stieglitz was amazed. He remembered her as this young, shy student, and now some years had passed and she seemed to be turning into quite an accomplished artist. So Alfred Stieglitz invited her back to New York, and he was going to give her a one-woman show. Now that meant all the other paintings that were in his gallery were going to be taken down, and only Georgia O'Keeffe's artwork would be up there. That was incredible for a woman artist to have that kind of exposure through one of the greats, Alfred Stieglitz. So she had the one-woman show, and over the course of time, she and Alfred fell in love. And in 1924, they got married. That's a great story. Now, she lived in New York City with Alfred. He continued to photograph. In fact, he photographed Georgia quite a lot. She had beautiful hands. And while in New York City, it was just so different than anything she'd seen before because Wisconsin was dairy country and she'd taught in Texas and South Carolina, and now she was in Manhattan and New York City. So what did she do? Like any good artist, she just drew and painted what was around her. So she had gone from painting these large magnified flowers to buildings. That's what she saw in New York City. So here's a painting of Georgia's called Sunspots on the Shelton. Now, Shelton was a famous hotel in New York City. And so she painted the skyscrapers around her and the play of light over those large objects to the point of abstraction. Now, it's really interesting. See, New York City in the 1920s was a burgeoning city. Skyscrapers, the idea of building multiple floors, not just 3 or 4 floors, but 20, 30, 50 floors, really tall buildings. And that's because of advancements in steel and ironworks and also the invention of the Otis elevator. So now we could have really tall buildings. In fact, in New York City, buildings were going up every day, and probably one of the most famous that you might have heard of, the Empire State Building, was built between 1928 and 1931. It actually reminds me of that scripture verse where we talk about building a tall tower, because my guess is the architects and engineers in New York really wanted to have the tallest building in the world, which the Empire State Building was for a period of 40 years. They were just driven by this pride. I must have the tallest building. Well, in the Bible, there's a section in Genesis 11, that talks about when the people there really wanted to build a tower, they thought if they could build it really high and it reached the heavens, they could be like God. Genesis 11:4 says, "Then they said, 'Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth.'" See, they wanted to be like God, and it was pride that was driving them to build that up. Well, see, God doesn't want us to build things for our own glory. He wants us to do things so that we can point others to His glory. That's a really great story. And so I do want you to make really beautiful art, but I want you to do it to show how amazing God is, because He designed you to be creative. So in New York City, all those buildings were going up, and Georgia was surrounded by that, but boy, she really missed the countryside and the nature that she fell in love with in Wisconsin. And so she and Alfred bought a country home up in the upper part of New York at Lake George. And that's where she explored the idea of these large nature studies again. So she had done her skyscrapers, and they were quite popular in New York, but she wanted to return to her roots of drawing the nature she was drawn to. Now here's an example of a Georgia O'Keeffe painting called Poppy. Now the poppy was a very popular subject matter for Georgia O'Keeffe. This is a oriental poppy. You see it has a very dark center. This is a very close-up view of a poppy. It's a single flower. And you'll notice it doesn't even stay within the frame of the painting. It goes off the frame. So the petals are actually larger than this. And it's a really close-up view, bright, vivid colors. Look at all those shades of red and orange that are in there. And only a little bit of negative space, right? A space that's not the poppy. And she uses the green of the negative space to kind of make that poppy stand out. Now this is what Georgia O'Keeffe is most known for, her very large flower paintings. That's what most people think of when they hear Georgia O'Keeffe. And so we're going to be doing a project based on Georgia O'Keeffe's love of large flowers. Now, to do a painting that's really as large as Georgia did would take a really long time. So we're going to actually use a different technique. Instead of just drawing or painting, we're going to use the technique of collage. Now, collage comes from the French word to glue paper. So for our project, we're going to be using tissue paper, which has translucency. That means light can come through it. We're going to talk about that more in another lesson. So we're going to be using warm colors of tissue paper, and by laying them down with a gluing technique, we're going to be making a large poppy. This is a side view of a poppy. This is the California poppy, or there's what's called the open view, where you see all the petals open together. The idea being that we're going to fill up the frame with as much flower as possible, not a lot of negative space. And we want to focus on the things that Georgia focused on, which was shape and color and form. So to get started, before we can actually do our collage technique, we need to draw the petal shapes. And so that's how we're going to start today. And we're only going to get as far as drawing our petal shapes today, and then we'll start the actual process of collage in lesson 2. Now, how we want to start is you want to have your square paper in front of you and your pencil, and you have to make a decision, my friends, on the kind of view you're going to have. Now I have several flowers here with me that are simple petal flowers, and by that I mean 4 to 6 petals, not a lot of petals. Something that has a lot of petals is just challenging. You'll notice this has a warm colors. This is called a bicolored flower. You can see there's red and yellow stripes in that flower. Isn't that interesting? But these are all warm colors, okay? And so you see here this is yellow. There's all kinds that you can get. This is a type of New Guinea impatiens, and it has 6 petals, and this is an orangey red. But maybe you don't have real plants around, which is fine. You can use a fake flower like this. Again, that has just a smaller number of petals, and these are warm colors. Now, I based mine off of the California poppy, which is the state flower of California. And the California poppy was all over the hillsides in California when the Spanish explorers came up the coast. They had gone to Mexico first, and they kept on going up the Pacific coast, and they saw hills covered with these California poppies. And they really felt that they had found the land of gold. The color was this bright golden yellow orange. And that's why they gave the moniker, the name, that this was the Golden State. This was the golden place because of all the California poppies they saw along the coast. And that is why the golden California poppy is our state flower in the state of California. So what we want to do is we want to really stay large, fill the space. So there's 2 ways we can go about it, friends. So if you want to do an open view, you're going to start, but we're not going to start right in the center. We want to start a little off center, right? Even with this poppy here, some of it goes off the page and you see the top. So she did not put it into the direct center. So draw a dot, not in the center, but kind of off center. And that's going to be your center for the flower. Now, when I look at the California poppy, I'm looking at a shape that is very much like a pizza slice or a bicycle seat. And I like to think of it in those terms. Think of a shape that's familiar to you. So if you have a live flower there, you look at that. I'm going to get some scrap paper first. I want to show you what I mean. So if I were to look at this shape, I'm only going to look at one petal. It kind of has like a heart at the end of that petal. So the petal shape is like that. Now when I look at the California poppy, I know you don't have a California poppy there. It's a little out of season for us here, but it's very much like a bicycle seat or a pizza slice that's rounded. So I'm going to draw first, so I think of a bicycle seat or a rounded pizza slice, and then that is my petal shape. So once you have a petal shape that you like, maybe yours is a little longer, like this. Whatever petal shape you like, draw one on scrap first, decide that that's the shape you like, and then when you're ready to draw on your big board, you're going to draw your 4 to 6 petals that shape. And remember, it's okay if it goes off the page. That's exactly what Georgia O'Keeffe would do. So I'm going to start large, and I'm going to use this kind of this bicycle seat shape. I'm going to come out from the center. I'm going to go off the page. See how large? Pretty big. We want to fill the space. Now you don't do the one next to it. You always, when you're working in even numbers like 4 or 6 petals, I'm going to go opposite. So I'm going to start at the same spot, but I'm going to go opposite, like this. Has kind of a frilled edge, like a rounded pizza slice or bicycle seat like that. Now, I don't want too much negative space. Again, Georgia O'Keeffe filled the canvas with her flower. So now I'm going to do the other petals. Same idea, same shape, like a rounded bicycle seat or pizza slice. And then my last one. A little bit of that one goes off the page, like so. Now, supposing you wanted to do a side view. Let me show you. Like if I look at this New Guinean patience from a side view, if you think of and you're looking at something from the side, like a fan, okay, you're not seeing down into the center. You have a point where all the petals come from. So I'm going to make a point towards the corner, and now all the petals are going to radiate from there. But they have kind of a heart-shaped top, so it's more like this shape here. So start with my center petal, my largest petal, and it kind of has a heart shape. And right next to it, but I can't see the whole petal, is another petal that kind of has a heart shape. You see how it's tucked behind? And then I have another petal, but it's going to go off the page. That's okay. It's okay if it goes off the page. And they're all connected with a little bit of a stem. Not a lot of stem. The flower, we want to take up most of the space. So that's like a side view. And then this is the open view. You can do either one, friends. The concepts are the same. The idea that O'Keeffe wanted to show the beauty in nature in a unique way, very up close, very magnified, so that whoever was looking at it couldn't ignore it, right? They couldn't walk by. Her idea was that a lot of people just walk by flowers all the time. They don't take the time to soak in the beauty because they're small and sometimes they seem abundant. So she really felt she needed to do it big, get people's attention. So the next time we're together, friends, we're going to start laying in our color and following some of the ideas of Georgia O'Keeffe. And I hope you'll join me for lesson 2 for our poppy collage.